Phil Taylor did not throw a single dart all evening. He sat in a room in Finland, phone in hand, while an 18-year-old wandered around him, half interested in the practice board 6 feet away. Then that 18-year-old walked on stage, stone cold, and put 10 180s into the board with an average over 110. Taylor watched it happen and could not explain what he had just seen. He has spent decades trying to understand what makes a great darts player, and Luke Littler broke his own model of it in a single night. This is not a story about one match. It is a story about two very different men who happen to hold the same record between them, one who already owns it, and one who might be about to take it apart. Start with the man who set the bar. Phil Taylor won 16 world championships across 2 darts organizations before he retired. 2 came under the old BDO banner in the early 90s, when darts was still a smoky pub sport fighting for TV time. The other 14 came after Taylor, and a handful of rebel players broke away to form what became the PDC, a split that very nearly bankrupted him personally. Taylor has said plainly that without the money he put into that breakaway tour, players like Littler, Michael Van Gerwen and Luke Humphries might never have had a stage to walk onto at all. He calls it the price he paid so darts could become what it is now. For most of the last decade, 16 world titles looked less like a record and more like a wall. Nobody got close. Van Gerwen managed 3. Everybody else fell further back. Then a 16-year-old from Warrington turned up at Alexandra Palace in December of 2023 and reached the final on his tournament debut, losing to Luke Humphries but changing the conversation in one fortnight. A year later, he won it, beating Michael Van Gerwen to become the youngest world champion the sport had ever seen. And this January, he won it again, tearing through Gian van Veen 7 sets to 1 to become only the 4th player in the tournament's history to defend the title successfully. 2 world titles by the age of 18. Taylor took until his mid-30s to reach that same number. The maths writing itself is obvious, and everybody in darts has started doing it out loud. Littler, to his credit, has mostly refused to do it himself. Asked directly after his second title whether Taylor's record was now in his sights, he gave an answer that was almost apologetic. 14 more PDC titles to go, he said, and if it happens, but it could take another 15 or 16 years. On another occasion, he went further and said he personally does not think anyone will ever catch Taylor, himself included. It is a strange thing to hear from a teenager who is already the most dominant player in the sport, but it fits the pattern of how Littler talks about himself. Low-key, slightly bored by the hype, more interested in getting back to his hotel room to play video games than in discussing his own legacy. Taylor sees it differently, and he is not shy about saying so. After Littler's second world title, he told The Sun that if anybody has a chance of reaching 16, it is Littler and nobody else. Coming from the man whose record is under threat, that is not a small statement. Taylor spent 31 years building a reputation as the most ruthless closer the sport has ever produced. For him to hand the compliment over, this freely tells you something about how differently he rates Littler compared to everyone else who has tried and failed to close the gap. That respect did not appear overnight. Taylor has been watching Littler for longer than most casual fans realize, and the Finland story is where his fascination really starts to make sense. He described sitting with Littler before an exhibition appearance, expecting some kind of warm-up, some ritual, anything resembling preparation. Instead, Littler barely glanced at a dartboard the entire evening. Taylor asked him outright why he was not taking a practice board down to London before defending his world title at Alexandra Palace, either. Littler's answer was a flat no. He was going to rent a house in London and turn up when it mattered, nothing more. For a player of Taylor's generation, that is close to unthinkable. Taylor has explained that his own mental preparation for the World Championship used to begin as early as August, months out from a tournament that would not start until December. He talks about the mind being the biggest muscle in the body, about needing to be ready long before the first dart is thrown. Littler appears to operate on the opposite theory entirely, treating the stage itself as the only rehearsal that matters. Taylor watched him prove that theory correct in Finland and came away calling it crazy, in the specific tone of someone who has just watched the rule he built his whole career around get broken in front of him. There is a lighter side to this rivalry too, and it tells you just as much about the relationship between the two men. Taylor has repeatedly been asked whether he would ever face Littler in a match, even an exhibition, and for a long time his answer was simply no. Not yet, he said, in terms that suggested he was not ready to find out the answer on a stage in front of cameras. When pushed further on whether he would ever agree to it, he laid out one condition: a single leg of 301, and Taylor throws first. It is a joke with a serious edge to it, the sort of handicap only a 16-time champion could propose with a straight face, and only a player as dominant as Littler could make sound like a fair fight anyway. Taylor has also told a story about losing to Littler at something rather less prestigious than darts. He described being beaten by the teenager at Jenga, the tower building game, and reacting with the kind of mock outrage that has become part of his public persona around Littler. It is a small moment, but it fits a larger truth. Taylor does not talk about Littler the way rivals usually talk about the man threatening their legacy. He talks about him more like an uncle would talk about a nephew who has just beaten him at cards, equal parts irritated and delighted. Underneath the jokes sits a genuinely complicated question for the sport. Darts has never had a changing of the guard look quite like this before. Taylor's dominance was built slowly, contested fiercely by a generation of rivals including Van Gerwen, Raymond van Barneveld and Adrian Lewis, all of whom pushed him and occasionally beat him on the bigger stages. Littler's rise has looked different, faster, more total, with less resistance from the players around him despite them being some of the best the sport has ever produced. Whether that says more about Littler's talent or about a generational gap in the game itself is something pundits are still arguing about, and probably will be for years. What nobody disputes is the number itself: 16 world titles, set by one man across 2 organizations and 3 decades, now sitting as the single most quoted target in darts. Every time Littler wins another one, the distance to that number gets smaller and the conversation gets louder, whether Littler wants it or not. There is also the exhibition that has never happened and might never happen. Fans have wanted to see Taylor and Littler share a stage for years now, ever since Littler first burst into view as a teenager. Taylor has flirted with the idea publicly more than once, sometimes ruling it out entirely, sometimes floating conditions that sound almost designed to keep the door open without committing to walking through it. Age and the physical toll of 3 decades on the oche have not made that any simpler. Whether it ever happens on a real stage with real cameras is still an open question, and Taylor himself has never fully closed it off. So where does that leave the two of them? One man built the record by himself, financed the tour that made it possible, and is now watching a teenager treat his own most sacred habits, months of preparation, hours on the practice board, as optional extras rather than requirements. The other man is 2 titles into a career that some believe could eventually eclipse 16 entirely, while publicly insisting he does not expect it to happen and privately playing exactly the kind of darts that makes people believe it might. Taylor was asked directly if Littler could do it. He did not hesitate. If anybody has got a chance, it is definitely him, coming from the only man who has ever actually done it. That is about as strong an endorsement as darts has ever produced. Whether it takes Littler another 5 years or another 16, the record now has a name attached to it that was not there a few years ago. And somewhere in Finland, Phil Taylor is still trying to work out how a kid who would not pick up a dart all evening, then hit 10 180s like it was nothing. Do you think Littler gets there before Taylor's record turns 30 years old, or is 16 still one number too far even for him? Drop your prediction below, and if you want the full story on how this rivalry keeps developing, subscribe to the Dart Side for more.